Trauma, we contract against the natural flow, the natural movement of our authentic self to want to engage with the world. And this is a very natural movement. It's the reach out that babies do to have contact, have nourishment, have connection, have engagement and interaction with the world around us. This is how we're designed as mammals, to be part of a unified whole. Trauma, and in particular complex trauma, acts on this and makes that very natural biological process unsafe. So people in places that were meant to be safe or keep us safe didn't or couldn't. And at an early age, while our nervous system was still growing and evolving and developing itself, these things have an impact. They mean that our nervous system has to prioritize survival approaches rather than engaging in having rich life approaches. So when a shock hits the nervous system, and a shock can be someone who's supposed to be kind, putting you down, or being emotionally or physically, sexually abusive in some way, or needed help and support and attunement not being there. All those kinds of things arrive as a shock in the nervous system relative to an environment, a person, a situation that was meant to be safe when you were the child. So they arrive as a shock in the nervous system, and we mount a threat defense of some sort, which is potentially initially a fight or a flight defense, an attempt to get out of the situation or to control the situation, and that energy might get frozen and become unable to act, or the energy driving that can shut down altogether, and you can find yourself in a collapsed kind of state. And so when these environments continue, or the threat of this kind of thing continues, then the neural loops, the neural circuitry driving that threat defense stays looping in the lower parts of your brain, endlessly mounting a threat defense that never gets resolved. And when we talk about hardwiring, this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. Not that it never can be resolved, but it needs the right circumstances. And that's where therapy comes in, creating the right environment, the right interaction, the right meeting, and the right attunement, so that these neural circuits in the lower parts of your brain can finally complete, so that your system can go, okay, I am safe now, or relatively safe now, and I can begin to open again and go into this other mode where I'm exploring my environment, taking in new information, able to be open and vulnerable and engage with other people, to let them see me, and to be genuinely curious and open to them. Once your nervous system has had to adapt that way, and if it had to, the earlier it had to adapt to be that way, then the more strongly the wiring for a survival defense will be. Once you've had to adapt to be that way, then you're going to have an ongoing life scenario where triggers and things that remind you of that initial event or experience, place or person, are going to generate a response inside your body, inside your nervous system, as though you were right back there. You're going to feel as though it's happening all over again. Your body's going to try to mount one of those threat defenses, and without the right support, it may continue to loop and feel unmet and unresolved, and in fact get more panicked, terrified, hurt, angry, frightened, alienated, all the things that you had to shut off from in the first place. And in fact, that's part of the definition of trauma. A shock or threat that comes into the field, into the nervous system, that is so overwhelming that you have to shut down to parts of who you are. And quite literally that means that your frontal cortex is less effective. Communication from the lower parts of your brain that take care of body sensation and survival physiology and threat defenses and connecting with other people, disconnect from your frontal cortex, where we do all of our logical thinking, put things in perspective, put things in sequence, can orient well into current time and space. The dissociation of trauma separates different levels of our brain from each other, so information can't flow freely and we can't orient as well to the here and now, and it becomes easy for triggers to throw us off balance. And in fact, those triggers coming in generate the disconnect in the communication between the three levels of our brain. So you might be doing well enough that you can function generally in life and make sense of a lot of stressors using your frontal cortex, your smart brain, and put a lot of things in context. The boss is having a bad day. Give this time. But then when something that resembles the initial trauma, it could be the expression on someone's face, it could be a feeling inside you. When that comes forward and triggers the looping trauma memory, right then your body is having the same experience as when the initial traumatic event happened, or traumatic time was happening, where you had to shut down to yourself and shut down to your natural feelings. So this is the dissociation of trauma we're talking about, shutting down to what would have been an appropriate feeling, emotion, thought, response, behaviour, perspective, even to whole parts of yourself, shutting down whole parts of yourself that were not adaptive for the environment you found yourself in early years. It's really, really common for children who've grown up in environments that are not safe enough, not predictable, attuned, present, constant, caring enough to separate from themselves and show up in ways that are going to be most adaptive for that environment, show up the way that it seems that the adults need them to. And kids will do almost anything to maintain connection. That's a survival imperative as mammals, maintaining that survival, maintaining that connection. So with trauma, we have dissociation from aspects of ourselves in order that we can keep and manage ourselves functioning. So by separating those lower parts that are over-responding from the frontal cortex, which does our logical thought and planning, we can function in the world. We can study, we can have a job, we can drive a car or catch a bus. We're just not all connected. All parts of us are not online. So it's not a rich life, and it's can be quite a fragile and alienating way to go through the world when you're not connected, present, and flowing information up and down your brain, body, and nervous system. So when you're living in a state of that constant looping in the back part of your brain, the threat defenses, we call that state hypervigilant. You'll find yourself always a little bit on alert, always just a little bit checking out what's happening in the environment. What are the expressions on people's faces? What's the mood in the room? How do I need to show up? Do I need to step forward? Do I need to solve something? Do I need to hang back and be less visible? Like, what's needed here to smooth out the environment and make it more safe and maintain connection? So that's what hypervigilance can look like when it comes to complex PTSD. So when we're going through life in a hypervigilant way and a trigger comes in, something that reminds the body now of how it was then, we'll overreact. We're going to have a big response in the nervous system. Some of us might show that with anger or outward expression. Others might just become quite anxious and contracted. Others again might just kind of fade away or zone away or shut down even more. But having an out of proportion response to a current day situation is almost always going to be a pointer that something from earlier in life has been triggered, a pattern and a threat defense. So again, when you're going through life, over-responding, overreacting to all kinds of things and triggers without the right healing and help and support can generalize over time. More sorts of people and situations can start to become threatening. So when you're going through life that way, over-responding, overreacting, your nervous system always running that little bit high so that you're either feeling hyper-activated, too activated, or shut down and held back, frozen, or not all there. When that becomes the norm, even though you might not realize it, it might be so much the norm that you don't realize that, you're going to do things to cope. You're going to do things to try and manage your activation. Usually it's going to be to try and bring down too much activation. Sometimes we do things to chase sensation or feeling, to bring up our level of activation and capacity to participate. So what kinds of things do we do? This is often where we see compulsive behaviours of different sorts, which can be anything from continually showing up in the wrong kinds of relationships, trying compulsively to get a need met from a situation that's not going to meet that need. Compulsive behaviours in terms of eating or alcohol or substance use and misuse, even over-exercising, overworking. It can show up as chaotic behaviours, but usually you're going to try and do something to moderate the activation, something to bring it down, something to help you manage. It can even be disengaging and avoiding important things in your life. And of course, all of these strategies to manage your activation come at a cost in time. They kind of help in the short term, but long term, they're going to compromise your health and well-being and participation in life. So long term, we've got to do something about it. Find the right approaches that do work to heal the nervous system, addressing the three major levels of the brain and nervous system that become dysregulated on trauma impacts. So the kinds of therapies that are going to help you evolve this implicit body-based memory, and I'm gesturing here because it's the physiological survival memory at the base of the brain. So the kinds of therapies that are going to help finally resolve these endless neural loops of threat and survival defenses. Therapies that are going to support you to have the three major levels of your brain online and connected. So the lower brain survival circuits, the limbic system doing your stress response and your capacity to reach out and be soothed to good and safe people, and also to sense threat versus safety. And your frontal cortex, where you can reflect on your own experience, make plans, organize your thoughts, be coherent, be in present time. So we need a therapy that helps you to be present in those three levels of your brain and nervous system, in present time, oriented in time and space, and to bring forward just a little piece of that looping trauma memory in a way that's going to regulate it, in a way that's going to help it get solved now. Bring it something now that was needed then. The end result is going to be a capacity for you to be present in more situations in life that could previously have been triggering, but be able to connect with people, put yourself out into the world, have a broad range of experiences without being thrown so easily into hyperactivation or shutdown.